I've actually been reading Prince Harry's memoir, Spare. I talked a bit about my thoughts on Prince Harry and Meghan Markle on one of last year's episodes, but I wanted to reopen it up. I'm sure everyone's pretty sick of talking about Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, but I have some thoughts just from reading. I'm about a quarter of the way through the book. There's like 200 chapters in the book, which is insane. It's also very clearly ghost written, and overall it's interesting, especially his childhood, because in reassessing my thoughts on Prince Harry, what I've realized is that I think even though it's easy to sort of dismiss someone as like, well, you're so wealthy, so, you know, if I had all your money, I wouldn't have those problems. I think one thing that I've learned from this book is that whether you like him or hate him, Prince Harry is hurting a lot. He's really hurting. And I think I'm starting to feel really sorry for him because I understand his predicament, which I think is as follows. I think the royals are like born into this life where they're in the spotlight, thrust into it, essentially like against their will, but they just simply don't have a choice. Like they're just in it and they're instantly part of the public interest from when they're born. And Prince Harry was no different, and they're kind of publicly vilified and condemned and etc. And I think he grew up in this environment and probably hated it but didn't understand it or have the courage to reject it because he was a child. And then his mum died, and his mum was being chased by paparazzi. She was in a car being driven by someone who had alcohol in his system. But one thing that really spoke to me in this book that I thought was disgusting was that when the car crashed and Princess Diana's body was laying there dead, the paparazzi crowded around and took photos of her, which he found out. And I genuinely think that's like grubby, disgusting human behavior that you could do that. I think that's absolutely disgusting. And that event absolutely traumatized him. His childhood and that event specifically traumatized Prince Harry so much, beyond belief. And I can only imagine how hurtful that experience must have been for him, how divisive it must have been for the royal family, how difficult it might have been to talk about, and all of the above. And then, you know, as he goes on in his life, I think he starts to understand all these things, understand how wrong a lot of these things are and how hurtful a lot of these things have been to him. He starts unpacking his trauma or experiencing his trauma. And I think he gets to the point where we are now, where he's like, I hate this. I hate living in this world with, you know, this royal world where I'm constantly under public scrutiny. I don't want to be part of this anymore. I don't want my wife and children to be subject to the same things that myself and my mother were. So I want to leave. And then he, you know, essentially tries to leave. He tries to get out, and the royal family basically criticize him. The press criticize him. Everybody criticizes him for leaving. So he's in this sort of catch-22 where if he stays, he's going to be unhappy. If he leaves, he's going to be condemned, therefore unhappy. And he's leaving for his own safety and his family's safety and well-being. And I think then I think I don't really agree with him sort of dishing out truth bombs about the royal family and criticizing his family and everything. I don't really agree with that. But he's doing that because I think he thinks exposing and talking about why he left is going to make people understand why he left, which it's not doing. It's actively working against him because it gives the press more firepower to create problems for him. So no matter what he says and does, the press and the media are going to write about it, talk about it, and talk negatively about him, particularly in the UK and Australia, because everybody loves the royal family, or the media particularly love the royal family, so they hate him because he's a dissenter. But if he stays quiet and says nothing, they're going to write about him as well. They're going to say things about him as well, and he's just going to be stuck in that cycle that literally no matter what he does, he's trapped. He's going to get criticized, he's going to get accused, he's going to be unhappy, which I think is a really difficult position for him to be in. I don't think he's right to publish all this information about his family. I don't agree with that. But I do think that he's just a hurt person. And I guess maybe we look at the royal family and we think they're the kings and queens and princes, and something in our like primitive villager minds think like, you know, they get it. They have it all together. They understand. And it's like, well, no, they don't. It's just a long running family of wealth. Just because they have money and they're royal by their own volition, by their own words, we've just decided that these people are princes and kings and queens, which literally means nothing. It doesn't make them any better or smarter or more put together than any other human being. And I suspect Prince Harry is as lost as the rest of us, has no idea how to resolve this problem. Admittedly, I think he's going the wrong way about resolving the problem. I mean, he's definitely getting a lot of his anger out, which maybe is healthy, but yeah, I also think a lot of people just say like, oh, well, the media just does that. That's what the media does, which I do agree with that. But I think people handle that in different ways. Like, I think you look at Prince William and he's very much like, well, the media just does that. I have to accept that and tolerate that being who I am. But I think Harry's like, well, I don't want to accept it and I want to change it. He won't change it. It's not going to change. I can tell you that much. But that's what he wants. And he associates the media with his mother's death. And the other thing is, you know, Prince William is the firstborn, Harry's the secondborn. There's a discrepancy there between their personalities and what they want to do and how they've been raised. William's been raised knowing he's next in line for the throne, whereas Harry's been raised knowing he's the spare. And that's where the title of his book comes from. He's literally a spare. If William dies, at least we have Harry. And he was told that by his dad in a joking way as a kid. So I feel really sorry for him. It's a really interesting read. And one of the things that I find really interesting about it, I'm actually listening to the audiobook. I'm not actually reading the physical book, but we always, like, I just think it's fascinating from a more cultural standpoint that, you know, we all know, say, King Henry VIII. We know of him. You've probably heard of him. He's a historical figure, a king, was married heaps of times, had several of his wives beheaded, wanted to get a divorce, founded the Church of England. We know all that about King Henry VIII, right? Who I suppose is a descendant of Prince Harry. But what I find fascinating about Prince Harry's book is that in 200 years, any historian can go and listen to the audiobook of Prince Harry's book and literally hear Prince Harry tell his life story. How fascinating is that in like a historical context? Imagine if we could listen to an audiobook of King Henry VIII telling his life story, or any historical figure. Imagine if there was an audiobook of like Napoleon or Joan of Arc or any of these famous historical figures, Genghis Khan. Like, I just think it's fascinating that that's what the future's going to be. It's not going to be like searching for remnants of the past. It's going to literally be, we can listen to Prince Harry narrate his life via audiobook, via MP3. Just imagine, like, here's a question for this week for you guys to write in. Here's a question that I'd love to do next week. Which historical figure or dead person from any point in time would you like to hear them narrate their life in an audiobook? Like, it could be like Elvis Presley or, I don't know, like anyone in the history of the world that you're like, it would be like, geez, imagine, I mean, obviously it would never happen, but imagine like a Jesus Christ autobiography narrated by the author. I was born in 0 BC to Mary and God. My father was a very powerful man. My mother, but a villager.